knowledge, we are going.
Okay, record on this computer. There we go. All righty. Well, welcome everyone and good evening. This is another evening with an author with Skip Finley. I am Jay Lavelle, of course. You've seen me probably many times now, maybe more than you wanted to, but you're stuck with me. I'm here, and in the background, acting as Oz is our library. What do we call Abby? Our library overlord, maybe. Abby Stroop, who's the one that makes this all possible. And Abby, could you tell me a little bit about this series, because it's not the summertime when we normally do this?
It's not the summertime, and actually tonight is part of the Big Read Lakeshore, which is a program that we do in partnership with Hope College, and is actually funded in part by the National Endowment for the Arts.
That is wonderful, wonderful. And, I connected with Abby a couple of years back, and her and the Herrick District Library were all about doing some author interview shows, and it has just been a really fun time, some of my favorite things to do. So I really appreciate the support from Herrick District Library. We do have a couple other supporters, Go Indie Now, which is a network of indie artists, all run by Joe Compton, where he's producing shows that help indie artists get where they want to be and give them more information about the business, because it could be confusing. And then author Rebecca Jonesy, who is also another sponsor of most of the shows that I'm involved with, a really wonderful lady, and has been a big help in getting everything going. So thank you to all the sponsors, and thank you to Spilling Ink for letting me broadcast on our channel. So Skip Finley, it's so good to have you here with us tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going?
I don't know, how interesting that would be.
You were going to sing a song, right?
Yeah, we're not doing that. I I used to be a professional radio station executive for a number of years. That's how I started my career in broadcasting. One day, post retirement, decided I wanted to be a writer, and here we are today. And there's a lot of, funny twists and turns along the way. In between those two occupations, my third was, after deciding that I wanted to be a writer, I failed retirement fairly religiously 5 times in a row, coming up with these ridiculous things I thought I might want to do, one of which was being a tournament fisherman. My wife quickly disabused me of that notion. First, because I had never won anything, but second, because of how much it cost to leave Martha's Vineyard, where I live now. But I want to say how delighted I am to be here with you at what is a totally auspicious time. I think few in the audience, may realize there are some huge milestones. Last Friday was the milestone, of course, of the sinking of the whale ship Essex. Which is the fabulous story, the tragedy of whale ship Essex that Nathaniel Philbrick wrote. Nat was also the first person to blurb my book after I told him about it and met him at a luncheon at the Edgartown Yacht Club here on Martha's Vineyard. I'm going to circle back to that because it turns out to be a really cool story. I'm somewhat of an expert. People would argue me, but I can make a good case that the whaling as we know it started here on Martha's Vineyard, thanks to an oral story by our Native American community here, the Wampanoags, about a giant being named Moshe, who came here and used his toe, to carve out Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and the Elizabethan Islands, and to feed his children, killed and captured a whale, which they then ate. So that's one part of the story. Another part of the story was, just coincidentally, November this month is also the anniversary of when the Mayflower landed. And soon after the Mayflower got into Provincetown Harbor, the folks on ship were delighted to see the entire harbor and the bay filled with whales. One knucklehead, according to Nat Philbrick's book, about the Mayflower, got a blunderbuss, one of those old muskets that they used to use. And because the whale was big, evidently put too much gunpowder and took a shot at the thing. The gun blew up. The whale got away, but there we are with whaling and history, Native Americans, certainly the whales. A lot of times in question, it usually comes late at the end, so I want to address that first. When people ask me, well, what about the whale? Well, the whale story is an interesting one. Tonight, one of the chapters in my book, is literally titled "Sometimes the Whale Won." Well, I want to go back to the beginning of that story. Another friend who blurred my book, who, is another author, fabulous writer. He wrote the book, The Whale, Philip Hoare, has a story about an anthropologist who, after they found a harpoon buried in a whale that had died and washed up on shore, had the harpoon carbon dated to find that the whale had to have been at least 220 years old. Right?
Wow.
Okay. Whales, as big as they are, all right, have a heart, their heart beats maybe 8 times a minute. Okay, compare that to a tiny, tiny hummingbird whose heart beat, 1,000 or however many times a minute. But there's enough evidence to show that whales have been here longer than we have, or there are whales possibly swimming around today that were around during the Revolutionary War of America, between America and Britain.
Wow.
Today,
Well, that slow heartbeat means slow metabolism means long life.
There you go. So today, I found I knew nothing about whaling, and to most people, whales are the pink logo of Vineyard Vines that started Martha's Vineyard, the clothing line, but that's not their story. So anyway, what I have learned, whales are sentient beings. They have their own language. They probably have a religion. They have families. They have strong family ties. So in a lot of ways, except for size, they're just like us. Yes, their brains are huge, not as compared, to the density or, the IQ of them necessarily. But they've been around for quite a while. I've done my own research, which the experts in the Nantucket Historical Association and the New Bedford Whaling Museum and people who've written the Bibles about whaling have told me this is clearly wrong and don't do that. Largely because we don't know everything about whaling, but from what we know, from the facts that we have, I can share with you that we probably killed over 300,000 whales and generated about $10 billion in today's revenue over an approximate 260-year period. That whaling was the 3rd largest business in the state of Massachusetts and the 5th largest industry in America that was used to largely grease, in the most literal sense, the American Industrial Revolution. So that's a whole bunch of information, no one ever thinks about.
Yeah. Well, and so you're trying to retire. It's not working out very well. You worked in broadcasting for many years, and then now all of a sudden you've written this nonfiction book on whaling. Where did this come from?
I met 2 people at a dinner party. One, the husband sitting next to me, named John Kennedy, who edited my book, Whaling Captains of Color, America's First Meritocracy. And he's a very funny guy. Coincidentally, he's not Black, but he wrote the book about Black golfers, called A Place of Their Own. We got to talking, and it came out that I wanted to become a writer. So I said, well, what have you written? So I said, well, I wrote this, really funny autobiography that I haven't finished, So I said, what's it about? I said, well, it's about, being Black and growing up not deprived in the 50s. So I said, well, why haven't you finished it? I said, well, I don't know how it ends. And he got a kick out of that. So he said, writers write, but no, seriously, what have you written? Well, over the course of my, rather exalted, if you will, radio station career, I participated and closed probably $500 million worth of transactions, buying and selling radio stations and, launching networks and radio programming and, satellite network shows and things like that. A lot of fun, don't get me wrong. I made a tremendous amount of money, really, really enjoyed it. But the stuff I was writing, it was really dull, that no one today would read unless you had to, or in my case, there was money involved. And I mean business and strategic plans, loan documents, loan offerings, private placement memorandum, things, that just aren't that great. So anyway, John Kennedy.
So that's not fun writing.
No, it's not. It was fun because I was doing it, and that was the way of keeping score back then. So John Kennedy, says, well, he says, well, how, were you good at it? So I said, well, let's go back at $500 million. Folks have loaned me, $100 million before, one transaction, $193 million. So it's okay, you can write, but you got to stick to it and keep doing it. At the other table at these folks' house we were visiting, my wife was sitting next to a lady named Jane Seagrave, who today is my boss, who's the publisher of the Vineyard Gazette. And at the time, she'd said to my wife, well, who are you? What's your deal? And she said, knucklehead over there wants to be a writer. He's not really doing anything. So she was looking for someone to write the Oak Bluffs Town column, which in our little small line is an extraordinarily big deal. Its first columnist was a lady named Dorothy West, who was a Harlem Renaissance writer that you would know nothing about. But let me say that, her last editor was a lady named Jacqueline Kennedy, and she wrote a book called The Wedding, which became a movie starring Halle Berry that Oprah Winfrey produced. Now you kind of get a sense of, who Dorothy West was. Well, I was the third, fourth person to write that column, which I did for about 5 years. While I was writing the column, while I was there, as it turned out, our company also owns Martha's Vineyard magazine, which, due to the Charles W. Morgan, the old whale ship, being completely restored, refloated, and was brought back to New England from Mystic, where they did all the work, wanted to devote an entire issue of Martha's Vineyard magazine in May 2014 to the whale ship Charles W. Morgan. As luck would have it, in devoting that whole magazine issue to it, Paul Schneider, the editor, said, Skip, how'd you like to write an article about the black whaling captain for the issue, William A. Martin? So I'd be like, okay, now I'm gone from a newspaper columnist, now I'm a magazine writer. Hell yeah, I want to do that. So I did, and it didn't take long at all for my curiosity to get the better of me, and I asked myself, how in the hell does a black guy in 1880 get to be captain of a whale ship? Sometime later, I found out that not only was he not the first one, but he wasn't the only one. And one thing led to another. Depending on how you want to look at it, I suffer from ADHD and OCD. So before I knew it, I had about 4 of those shelves where there were books on whaling. And about $4,000 later, my wife found out, what the hell are you buying all of these whaling books? I said, I'm trying to find out more about this. So then that one thing led to, I got completely carried away. And, now here's this book.
Well, I like that. That seems like a logical progression to me. Because I also
You're a writer.
Yes. Well, I could sympathize. You get something in your head and you just hyper focus on it. And especially with ADD, it's like it just helps you right along as far as that goes.
It's all I wanted to do. I would go to, by the way, Jane Seagrave, my boss, also finally realized I used to be in the media business. I was looking for a sales manager and hired me to, be the director of sales and marketing for the Vineyard Gazette, which is, that's my day job, what I do today. But I would go to, in the morning, I go and do that day job, but I got back home and 5:30, 6 o'clock until, midnight, 1, all I wanted to do was this research and write this book. And, so that was March 2014, the book was published, June 15th, 2020. So it worked.
We're teasing around the book here for everyone. So I want to start digging into it a little bit, but before we get into the captains and the whaling itself, I'd like it if you could give us an idea of what this time period in America was like, especially for people of color.
Okay.
So I know that's not a nice question.
You know how the story starts. It was the best of times. This was not it for Black people. Technically, whaling goes back. If you want to credit the Native American community, here in Massachusetts, Martha's Vineyard, you're talking the early mid 1600s. If you were to credit whaling, as a community-centered avocation, meaning when the whale died offshore, they rolled up onshore and they called those drift whales, and the communities would, make rules as to who gets what piece of this animal to do, what with. But I think the whaling that we're talking about now, when we think of the book that none of you read, everybody talks about Moby Dick, that occurred in around 1840, 1850. Whaling, that kind of whaling, pretty much started in the mid 1700s, and or in and around while the Revolutionary War was occurring. Okay, the heyday of whaling probably is that period between 1820, all right, and about 1860. Well, while all that was going on, if you happen to be Black and you were one of the 389,000 people brought here, to the conterminous United States as we know them from Africa, you were bred just like you were an orange or an apple until 1863 when your people were freed. But there weren't 388,000 people freed. It was 3.9 million people who were freed. That wasn't a great time to be Black. But whaling provided an opportunity that just did not exist in this entire world for a person of color, which is something we're going to have to delve into because, a lot of my Black friends, well, why didn't just Black whaling captains? I said, well, it took me about a month and a half before I realized that didn't make sense. That just didn't work. We like to use the expression now, for example, African American. Well, dude, till 1863, we weren't Americans. Frankly, you could make a case until the Civil Rights Act of 1864. Black people weren't Americans, in America. So that appellation, that didn't work. Black as a, as a color, certainly would be useful, but what about the Native American community that participated so heavily in whaling, that literally died so Black people could take their place as whalers and harpooners? And then after the end of the Civil War, when Black people didn't do something as completely disgusting, as awful as whaling has turned out to be, the Cape Verdeans, who, yes, are Africans and from Africa, or as they like to say, we're the Africans who came to America on purpose. But they don't necessarily look like Black people, all of them, all of us. They have light eyes, they have fair skin, they have fair and often, straight hair. And yes, the country of Cabo de Verde is what they call it, is an African country. A lot of people say it may be, if I'm pronouncing that correct, the most polyglot nation of all nations in the world, because so many different races and nationalities, are there. End of the day, it's still Africa, they're still Africans, but you really can't call them Black. Black American didn't work, American didn't work, African American didn't work. And then in performing the research, I do have a pretty good research background. That's something I take pride in. I'm, fairly adept at. It didn't take me long to figure out that one of the more helpful things in my ability to find these guys was a thing called the crew list. At the New Bedford Public Library, there's a version of it at the New Bedford Public Library itself that are on index cards with the person's name and what ship they're on and what year, and what they looked like, how they were characterized. In the New Bedford Whaling Museum, they have the collection of the Seamen's Protection Certificates or papers, which functioned back in Revolutionary War, War of 1812, like a passport for a man on aboard ship. So that way, if you had that Seamen's certificate, the British wouldn't just take you away, and impress you to go to work for them, either working on our ships or working back in England or fighting in our armies or our navies. Well, peculiarly, because that Seamen's certificate, we have used very extensively, would be illegal today. You can't ask people, about their race, their nationality, and those type things. Well, on these Seamen's certificates, they had, your name, where you were born, where you were from, when you left, what was your age, what you looked like, and by what you look like, type hair, color skin, type skin. So after a while of looking at this, these things, things started jumping off the page at you and the descriptions of these people. Some were copper, some were tan, some were yellow, some were black, some were brown. Okay, we know what those are. Those are people of color. You also, though, you had people, who were, dark skin or light skin. Now dark skin is kind of problematic. If you're from the Azores, that's not a community that considers themselves people of color, even though they may be darker skinned. Or if you work on a ship at sea, usually it's a nice, beautiful, sunshiny day. Chances are you're going to wind up with a tan. Okay, so some of the things that we kind of took for granted just didn't work, but were extraordinarily useful in me being able to identify these people and, of course, write this book.
Now, could you and I've read the book, so I've read the passages going over this, but for the people out there who haven't read this, tell me a little bit about the draw to the sea, because this was extremely dangerous, nasty work. What was driving people out there?
Romance. Okay, the whaler that we know, that we relate to, it's probably not Tash Teague or Queequeg. Okay, it's the blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy from Edgartown here in Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, who, things went along, met a young lady, decided we're going to get married. I don't want to work on the farm if we had one. I don't want to cut trees. I want to go out to sea because here's all these people coming back with all this money. That's all they knew, because in whale ships in those days, they didn't tell you what the job was like. All you saw were the results. So it looked easy. So we have a place here in Martha's Vineyard, in front of the Harbor View Hotel, and there's a lighthouse there, and there's a I don't know what you call it, a path, a jetty, a sandy, kind of walkway out to where this is, out to this light where this lighthouse is. So that young man, that young lady, the night before he's going to get on the whale ship, they're holding hands and they're kissing and oohing and eyeing, looking up into the moonlight. That's the romance. The next day, he's going to be gone for a minute. He gets on this whale ship. He comes back rich as creases. We buy the big house with the black shutters, and, we're rich and we're set for life. That probably lasted till that whale ship coming out of Edgartown, got to that first buoy. And then he realized everything I've eaten for the last week is coming back up. Which is why they call these people green hands, because your first week or 3 spent on a whale ship, you spent, regurgitating, So that's the romantic part. And incredibly enough, it went downhill. Let me get to the punchline, because I do have another chapter, how bad was it? Okay.
My favorite chapter.
Yeah. Well, for 3.5 or 4 years, which is the average cruise on a whale ship, you're allotted a space about the size of the back seat of your SUV. 3.5 or 4 years. You eat there, you party there, you play there, you write, you read the one letter you may get, in 3.5 years, if you get that letter at all. With a bunch of, rather stinky, uneducated, people who are people who had no other option, which is why they're on these ships. So the worst story, one, was about the man I read about, who didn't mind being fully covered by roaches at night because they ate the bed bugs. Okay, so you imagine the squalor, your living conditions. And that wasn't the worst. The worst is when I realized that they washed their clothes in urine. They cleaned the deck in urine. And I mean, the questions abound. My first question was, well, where'd they get it? Well, duh, there's a barrel. We share this barrel and we keep that. How dirty were your damn clothes? How dirty was this boat?
Well, and why couldn't you use seawater? I don't know.
Seawater won't cut grease, and it will rot your clothes. Okay, it's what's the word I'm thinking about? The content of the urine.
Yeah, the uric acid or whatever is in there.
Grease. Yeah. Well, but so and look, it took me a couple of years to get to that point, to find those stories, because along the way I'm like, these guys had to have been crazy. This is insane. Now the obvious, being eaten by a whale, that didn't happen, quite as much as you would think. In fact, there were 7 ships. I actually have the name of the 6 that include the Essex, that were sunk by whales. How did the whale do that? Did it sink it? The sperm whale in the Essex is, 80 feet long, 85 feet long, and probably 75 or 80 tons. The biggest whales in those days, were 90 feet and 100 tons. People don't realize it, but they can swim up to 20 miles an hour. So imagine something that's 80 feet long, swimming 20 some miles an hour, that's 70 tons, hits your wooden whale ship. Well, how do you think that's going to wind up? Cracks it like an egg.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then, people also fail to realize how diminutive a whale ship really is. All right. Yes, when the Charles W. Morgan sailed here to Martha's Vineyard, I was delighted to be there and to watch it on a beautiful Chamber of Commerce day with these blue skies and the huge sails billowing in the air, sail to that island. I mean, it was tear-inducing. It really was. When I drove back around to the dock, saw my people, my friends who, hooked me up to, get on the ship. And, I walked up the plank and I walked around and I went down specifically to the forecastle to see what that looked like and realized if I wasn't standing on the top deck, there was nowhere on that ship that I could stand up. I could not stand fully erect. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that for 3.5 or 4 years?
No. Oh my gosh, no. I can't.
And this is a brand spanking new, you could still smell the sawdust. This hadn't had, a dead whale a month for 18 years aboard it, for example. Butchered and cut up alongside it. So anyway, whaling was horrible. The food was bad, the pay was bad. But if you were a person of color, you had no other opportunity. Okay? You were judged, had the man side by the character, not the color of your skin, but the character. It was pretty easy, which is the answer. Everyone asked that, how does a black guy get to be, captain of a whale ship?
Well, yeah, and the subtitle of your book is America's First Meritocracy, and so before you go into that, I wanted to ask you, could you explain what a meritocracy is?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a terrible thing to say, but consider my sense of humor. Nowadays we have meritocracy. It's called the NBA. Okay, and those guys who are, well more than 6 and some just passing 7 feet tall, they don't sit on the bench, for however many minutes, 60 minutes or whatever. They're out there running up and down, passing the ball, dunking the ball, making points, keeping score. It's a little bit different in whaling. In whaling, once you were that blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy gonna make my fortune, and live this romance, all you wanted to do was get off that damn boat. Period. All right. The desertion rates for whaling, probably in the aggregate was 30 or 40%. People wanted to get off that boat. This, please read. If you want to be totally depressed and frightened, read this book and see how bad, whaling really was, despite all of that moolah. All of that money was great.
Well, there were some exciting stories in there, though, too. So it's not all depressing, guys.
No.
There's some cool stuff.
Most people will finish. But I'll tell you what. I'm a pretty good storyteller. I'm a great researcher. I'm a pretty good storyteller. I'm an okay writer. And if you put those things together, chances are good you'll finish the book. If you ask yourself one question, the first question people ask is, how the hell they get to be a captain?
Yeah.
Well, that 16, 17-year-old kid who went on that one trip, okay, he went back and told his friends too, you don't want to do this. This is not for you, okay? So year after year after year, the Black Native American man from Cabo de Verde, West Indian, South Sea Islander, Kanaka from, Hawaii, they had nowhere else to go. Dad didn't own a store I can work for. My future father-in-law doesn't own a farm I can work at. So if these persons of color, these men of color, kept coming back year after year, year after year. Well, for a business whose fundamental business plan did not change for over 200 years, okay, by the time you're on your 3rd or 4th voyage, you got it down. you know what to do. You know how to handle all of this. And then one day when you're out there and you're 1,200 miles out there to sea, something happens to the captain. Probably not a whale eating him, because that only happened 47 times I've been able to find out. But he could have fallen off of a mast. He could have drowned. A multitude of things could have happened. The medical situation was terrible. A captain is given a box. In the box, they have, 25 or 30. I've got a list of them in the book. Here's these substances. So if this guy gets that, give him this, that'll fix him. Well, there's a story in there, one day, one captain realizes that, oh man, this guy on his deathbed, he needs a number 11. And he goes to the box and the 11's not there. It's all gone. It's all been used up. So he got a 5 and a 6 and put them together. Dude lived, so great. But these are your conditions. So in something happened to that captain, the men look around, there's, 20 to 36 folks, souls aboard that ship. All they want to know is who's going to get us home. Who's going to lead us to more whales, kill the whales, harvest the whale, take the oil back home, or at least, bottom line, who's going to get us home? And it turned out, when they looked around, it was going to be a person of color who had all that experience, because you have to learn how to navigate. Not all. There's one guy in the book, and his whaling captaincy lasts, about a week, when the crew realizes he hasn't learned how to navigate. This is not a safe place for me.
Well, I think that Abby might have a question from our viewers. Abby, are you around?
All right.
I am here. I'm cracking up over here. I'm sorry.
That wasn't my purpose.
You totally caught me off my game. Skip, you're a marvelous story.
I don't know what you expected, but Okay, fourth career, stand up whaling.
Whaling,
Stand up
that's
whaling.
the
A whale walks into a bar.
Now we're going somewhere. Constance was actually wondering what kinds of records and documents and artifacts you were able to find to use in your research.
That's a great question, but that's one that no one actually has asked me.
Well done, Constance.
The crew list was probably the most important source of information. So let me tell you. So I start this. I knew there was one whale captain, and I was able to, research online. Thank you, Mr. Google. And you're not allowed to use Wikipedia, but thank you, Wikipedia. And I'm not allowed to use Ancestry.com, but thank you very much. Because all those references are deleted from the book, thanks to my publisher. Mm-hmm. But the more I learned, the more I realized I had to go to New Bedford and go to the Whaling Museum. That's the source. This is a museum that is, the Smithsonian would not be able to do a better job. Okay, all the money in the world. They have a scrimshaw room that's probably the size of 2 houses filled with scrimshaw, and there's billions of dollars of handcrafted art at museum quality, in this place. But needless to say, they've got a fabulous, library. So I'm in this library, and I'm doing as best I can. I used to work in the library when I was in high school, so I knew what a card catalog was. So I had some names. I go to the card catalog, look up that person's name. Every time I read one of these books, I take notes, on all of it. I go to the index and I take all these names out, and I kept my little list when I went over there to New Bedford. And one day, Mark Prochnick, the librarian at the New Bedford Whaling Museum Library, says, I've seen you a couple times, dude, what are you doing? I was, well, I'm writing a book about, black whaling captains at the time. I said, oh yeah, there's several of those. Says, how many, there's at least 12 of those. But dude, I got about 40. I'm working on some more. And he's like, 40, really? So I told him about my process. So he says, I think I can help you. Lord. So he turned me onto the crew list. Well, at the time, the crew list originally was prepared by the people in the Workers' Progress Administration back in the real depression, when folks didn't have work, and they would create these jobs, tasks for people to do. One of them was take all the seaman certificates, record that information on index cards. That's at the New Bedford Public Library. By the way, there's 133 index drawers. Each one has about 150 of these, cards. And yes, I read every single one of them, and took notes and copied as many as I could. Back over at New Bedford, as luck would have it, Judith Lund's book, American Offshore Whaling, which she has, they're two very thick volumes of these. I own them too. They had all been kind of sort of digitized, meaning they put all the names of the people and all the information on these spreadsheets. So Mark says, we have these, and I'm like, oh my God. Okay, back to that $200 billion. Most of the financial modeling I did was with spreadsheets. When I say I still use Lotus 123, one of my geek buddies gave me a hot copy of it, so I can continue to use it, and I can save it in Excel so other people can use it, because there's no more Lotus 123. Before that, it was VisiCalc, and I'm giving away both my age and how long I've been doing spreadsheets. But spreadsheets are something that I pride myself in. So once I got this spreadsheet, which is maybe 20 columns wide, okay, to describe it to you, and 123,000 lines long, you can data sort it by race. And I could find these people, okay, and then it has their rank, and it has where they. So anyway, I followed this and found more and more and more, information. Mark was then able to, once I found their names, say, well, over the years, the families of these men, have made scrapbooks on their lives, and after they died, they've donated us the scrapbooks, and they're over here. So I could give him a name, and he'd go get one of these big scrapbooks, and you can barely touch the thing yourself. They put them on these big foam, cushions so that they won't bend or, or twist anything too easily. And that's how I was able to find stories about these people. So there's the, kind of, hard, fast, emotionless spreadsheet. Then there's the reading books and taking copious notes and putting those in spreadsheets. So if I want to know, well, how fast is a sperm whale, I'll go to my information sheet under whale and then speed and, tell me, it's not quite that easy. There's a dozen different types of whales without this, the versions of them. But I'm just using that, as an example.
Well, I like it that you were data mining not only digitally, but
yes,
also with books and in a museum. That's phenomenal. I mean, that is great research.
Okay. Well, then after I wound up meeting people in the New Bedford community at the New Bedford Historical Association, whose ancestors were whalers. Okay, when I say ancestors, I'll tell you, a fabulous story. But so I met a bunch of people. So I talked about, to these people, Cape Verdean, Native American, Black, I found a little bit about those people. Then they would tell me what they knew about their ancestors. A couple of them would take me around New Bedford and take me to visit the graves of where some of these men were buried. I mean, it's just, absolutely mind-boggling, the information. So I met so many. Well, there's not that many, because remember, we're talking 1800s, but I met several descendants of whaling captains. One, Diane, what's her last name? Let me not use people's names. I met this lady who was probably, her father was a whaling captain. Okay, his first trip was in 1907, 1910, I forget. He had a couple of, really good stories. But her father was a whaling captain. It turns out this man was probably the oldest living whale captain in the world. And she is his daughter. So she is the oldest living descendant of a whaling captain in all of America. Remember those, well, you don't know. I didn't mention that. There's about 175,000 people ever went whaling. Okay, and of course 90% of them only went once, so really breaks down how many did it year after year after year. So it was sometimes quite emotional, to meet these people. I mean, particularly since most of them knew very little about the whaling industry, or their folks. I've had folks call me and say, yeah, I think that my great-great-grandfather says, well, what was his name? And I'll go over and grab that book and pull the dude's name out and tell them, well, he was on this ship and that ship and that ship and that ship, and their minds are blown, But the information was that good. The information was that detailed, and was the type of information, as I mentioned, you would not be allowed to collect today. That's a long answer to that question. I just can't help myself.
No, it's cool to see the process because that was one of my questions for a little bit later is, how you go about researching something like this when the data is so old. So I think that was a long answer, but I think it was absolutely perfect. And I have another kind of this might be a long answer for you as well. I have a feeling, so two things, I'd love to know what a day in the life, a typical day in the life of a whaler was like out at sea. But I'd also like to hear a little bit about, because this is one thing that when I was sitting on my back porch this summer reading this book, and I actually had put the book down. I was like, oh damn, this is not good. And it's when you were talking about the captains and sailors having to be very careful where they made port because of the slavery laws in America. So if it's possible to touch on those, they're not exactly nice subjects, but
No. Let me start the last one.
yeah.
All told, due to the Lund's number, there were 130 whaling ports. There were 75 of highest use, but it was Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, New Bedford, and the Hamptons. Sag Harbor, all right, was over 90% of the whaling industry took place. Part of that was they already had the infrastructure. If you remember, when they called the New World, they were talking about the northeastern states, not the southern ones. Okay, and whaling goes way back to the New World. So that's part of it. Yes, they had the close by deep ocean, deep harbors, which were useful. Nantucket did not have forests, which is why it lost the business. They had no wood to make ships. That's why the business moved over, thanks to the Quakers, over to New Bedford. All right, but no one went to southern ports thanks to the Fugitive Slave Acts that you mentioned of 1792 and 1850, which in the most literal sense meant if I'm a slave master, slave owner, I can say, that brown guy over there is my slave and I want him back. Well, the magistrate's going to come and going to give you to him and, without any more proof than your word for it, and you're gone. Not a lot of incentive. Now, I say in the early years, mid 1700s, okay, almost till the 1800s, not everyone, there weren't that many people of color at all, just because there weren't that many people of color, comparatively. We had killed off all the Native Americans when the Europeans brought their disease here. There weren't that many Africans, brought here against their will from Africa. So there just weren't that many, but they were disproportionate in their participation in the whaling industry, because the other thing about the Northeast is that's where that freedom was. Those were the Quakers, the Friends, were anti-slavery. That didn't mean they wanted you in their religion. That didn't mean necessarily they wanted you in their house, but they didn't believe in slavery, and after all the Indians had died, they wanted those other people of color working on those whale ships that they owned. So that's kind of a longer answer than you're looking for. I've kind of forgot the first part of your question.
No, that's not too long at all. No, it was, like I said, it was startling when I read that, because I hadn't even thought of it. I hadn't thought of the ship pulling into port and all of a sudden you're in, quote, enemy territory, basically.
Oh yeah, you're done. Yeah, well, let's put some meats and boundaries on the business. All right, those 175,000 people, men, who pursued this awful industry, which worked to be good, but this awful industry. Somewhere, you pick a number. I use 30 to 40% were people of color. Okay, now, it's a very difficult thing to say, because these were the years that, how can I say this cleanly? A person captured from Africa is on a slave ship for a certain period of time. The females, were used for other purposes. So there's a chance that by the time they got here or soon after, she would have a baby, which wasn't quite as black as she was. And that happened twice. So that son and that daughter got together and might have had a baby who was not quite so black as either one of them. So we're talking about the years that, if you were fair skinned, but, of African, ascent, you didn't want people to know that you were black, and you certainly had no incentive to tell them that. Okay, so you can. So I think most whaling people are gratuitously say 20%. I say it could be as high as 40. Use 30.
Okay.
Those 175,000 men took 15,913 whale trips, for which they used 2,700 whale ships that were captained by 2,500 people, about 50 of whom happened to be, men of color, to pursue this industry over all those years. Now, the fact that we have that much information about an industry that today people know absolutely nothing about is just incredible. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it really is. Now, I have a question that popped up in the Q&A chat here from Russell Dykstra. Russell, thank you for chiming in with a question. Mr. Finley, please comment on your sense of blending between the two books, Whaling Captains of Color and In the Heart of the Sea.
The Heart of the Sea, first of all, is great literature. Okay, let's do that. Second of all, it's a very specific story, well told. Okay, from a little bit of information. It's an important book, not just for the whaling, but for the nature of the literature. Okay, Herman Melville, okay, read that before he did Moby Dick. The book Moby Dick is, the end of the book of the book Moby Dick. Everybody knows what's happened. I'm not giving it away, but that was the sinking of the whale ship Essex. Now, again, you have to realize this is something that didn't happen that often. Okay, 47 of 2,500 men who were captains were killed by whales. That's not a big number. There are only 7 whale ships that were sunk by whales. That's an incredibly small number given 2,500, 2,700, ships, for example. The parallels are, thanks to Nathaniel Philbrook, because you would not know it, but 7 of the people on that ship were black men, okay, in these capacities. There's a couple, this is not funny, ha-ha, funny, unusual. You could, after the ship was sunk, 3 lifeboats, whale ships, separate the men, 18 guys, okay, or I forget the exact number, 18 guys, and 6 are in each of the ships. As it turned out, only 8 people made it back to Nantucket safely, okay? All the rest, except 1, I'll get back to that, died. Several of them were eaten. Many of them happened to be black. Now, I've heard people say, well, they probably ate the black guys on purpose. Look, I can understand that, but I certainly get endemic racism. Okay. But no, only one of the sailors was killed to be eaten, and he wanted to die, the young man. If you read the book, and I'm sorry to give away the ending, hopefully you could see one of the 2 movies. The better one was, the one based on Nat's book. So people have said that. I've gone back and studied and looked at. Here's a couple of things. The act of whaling is someone says, "Thar blows," which they probably never said. Just, by the way, almost every writer has said they've never said that before. There's no reason to say there she blows, she, he, thar blows is probably, more than likely. It's your first time on a whale trip and you're excited and your adrenaline is racing and your heart is pumping. The captain says, man the boats, and you run over there and you get in that boat and they lower you down and you row that 30-foot boat, probably 2 or 3 miles, to a creature that's 95 feet long, and 75 tons, and you stab it with a harpoon until you kill it. How's that for a great day on the water? Okay. Well, after you've killed it, you got to tie it up and tow it back. So in the dead of night, theoretically, you're 7 or 8 miles away from the mothership. You got to tow this tons of dead meat across the water. Well, you're talking about a group of humans who probably had negative body fat. Now, one of the things that you need if you're starving is body fat. So chances are these black guys and black people, I'm probably the exception, I don't have any muscles at all, but, are known for their physical prowess. These are, muscular, hard work and everything. That's probably why many of them died first. By the way, no, the black person was not eaten first, and the last person eaten, was not black either. So it was like, what do you call it? The lifeboat strategy. Okay, dude, you died your food. Dude, your food. I really shouldn't make light of that, but probably never going to happen to me.
Well, I would hope not. I would really hope not.
Either way, I don't want to be eaten. I don't want to eat anybody.
Well, wasn't that was kind of that was a thing for a few hundred years? Wasn't that like the pact of the sea or the law of the sea? Something if
they call it the what was it, the custom of the sea.
There you go. Yeah, and if anyone wants to look that up, do so at your own risk. It's very disturbing.
Yeah, it is. And some like to talk about it, obviously. But like I said, 8 folks out of 30 made it home. At 20, I think 21 people aboard. It's a small ship.
Yeah.
But that's how they would not have gotten home otherwise. So you get that. Okay, now let me go back. That's 7 of those black guys. 2 of them just died and pushed them overboard. They're buried at sea. The other ones were 7 and 6. 4 of them were eaten. 1 guy deserted. His name was Henry DeWitt. And on the whole boat, that was the smartest guy. As soon as the Essex took that turn, day 1, they got into a storm. The captain this was his first captaincy. He wasn't too sure how to handle the storm. He wanted to go back to Nantucket. That would have been the move, but he didn't do it. The first mate talked him out of doing that. Okay. Those 7 black guys, they weren't just picked up off the streets of Nantucket or Boston, where I think 4 or 5 of them came from. They'd been on whale ships before. They knew the deal. They knew how to do this, or the captain and crew wouldn't have chosen them. Management doesn't choose people, fundamentally can't do the job. The Henry DeWitt had enough experience to say, I don't trust this captain. He doesn't know what he's doing. The first mate has lost his mind. I'm getting off the ship as quickly as I can. And at an island called Atticanes, he got off the island. We don't know what the hell happened to him. So you hear there's a book or a movie in there someplace I'm working on. This guy, Henry DeWitt, is going to start out as a slave who becomes a whaling captain and has to change his name a couple of times. But
yeah, it seems like it'd be a good historical fiction right there. I would definitely dig into that. But we've got a little bit less than 10 minutes here, and I've got so many great questions that I could be asking you. And everybody, I'm sorry, I can't ask a million more questions. You're going to have to read this book.
It's just quick, shorter. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. I'll tell you what, I'd rather have more information than less. So I'm going to ask you one more question. What was your favorite story? And I'm sure you've been asked this before. What was your favorite story that you've come across in this research?
I have several. My favorite one is probably just awful though, because it was just so out of left field. Henry Gonzalez, from Cabo de Verde, was a whaling ship captain. He was employed by a group of explorers, up in Canada, someplace in the upper Northwest, to take them to where they're going to further explore, the country. Well, he did that, but then he stole the ship and left them there to die.
Oh my God.
So, I know they're supposed to be, Skip, but what about the heroic story? And the guy says, but that's what happened. I got a kick out of that. And he does some very cool things along the way. The dude's a colossal schmuck, but I like that. I like the story about Valentine Rosa, who with his wife aboard ship, sinks the ship. They get wrecked on an atoll or someplace. There's so many stories. Joseph Belaine, man who's Native American man from here in Martha's Vineyard, was a whaler for 70 some years. For most of that time, he was on the water, not even on land. And when he was buried here on Martha's Vineyard, a dove came and lit on and sat on his coffin, during the funeral. I mean, Come on.
Wow. Wow. Well, I tell you one that I liked was the guy that could throw the harpoons like 40 feet.
Claude
Picked
Oliveira.
up. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean,
Right. He has the record for throwing a harpoon. I forget exactly, 46 feet or something. And that's the furthest away you have to be to kill a whale. So in other words, you've got to be substantially closer than that.
yeah. Well, and these guys are like starving and living in the worst conditions possible, but they're still capable of these incredible physical acts. It's
Hey, listen. I remember the question. I remember the question you asked when I answered. Very, very quickly. What was the day of life of a whale
oh
shark?
yeah, that's right. I forgot.
Is the most boring experience in your life. Okay, they're not whales walking up, knocking on your door, kill me, kill me, kill me. Okay, you're driving the boat. Look, how many sunrises and sunsets before it's just not cool anymore. How many sunfish do you have to see, or flying fish, to spark your imagination? There's absolutely nothing to do in this boat. No TV, no books, no radio, no mail, no nothing. By the way, no sex. I'll keep it clean, but no sex. I mean no sex. I mean no jail sex. Because whaling occurred during the Victorian era. That was out. None of that. People forget. I'm sorry.
No, I think that is a perfect note to end this interview. There was no jail sex on the whaling boats, just so you know. Well, Skip, you have been amazing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm sorry. I have a website. Any guys?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I go, it's skipfinley.com. If you have a question, we didn't get to it, send it to me. I'll respond.
Yeah, definitely. And Whaling Captains of Color, America's First Meritocracy, a wonderful read. And I don't even read a whole lot of nonfiction, but I really enjoyed it. So I think you guys will enjoy it too. Well, Abby, do you want to hop on here and say give us any final words?
I'm still pulling together my dignity over here.
The
I'm
last
kind of
rites?
recording, and this is not good. See, there's a reason I'm on mute, guys. There's a reason. Skip, I wanted to say thank you so much.
I'm glad.
This is just, the thing that blows my mind is that this is an entire chapter of American history that you've uncovered in your retirement. This is mind-blowing. And I'm so grateful. I don't think anybody could tell the story the way you do. Don't sell yourself short to Nat Philbrick, Mr. Finley. This is an amazing book, and we are so grateful to you for coming along with us for this journey.
That's very nice of you to say that. I do appreciate it. And I've enjoyed this. This is a wonderful opportunity. I've never heard of anyone doing this before. So if there's an opportunity to go to the Herrick District website and write him a check, please do.
And me too. You can send me checks. I mean, we could all use checks. I'm kidding, guys. No, this was a great show. Skip, you are extremely entertaining. I'm really happy that we got to do this. And Herrick District Library, Abby Stroop, thank you so much for making this possible. And to everybody out there that's watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. And I don't know what the next show will be, but I'm sure it'll be something cool. Take care, everyone.
Jason, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.